welcome to Talk Tantra to me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today I have Mansal Denton. He is the founder of Sacred Hunting. He facilitates amazing hunting retreats here in Austin and all over the world, really. And I attended one here in just 3 hours west-ish of Austin a couple of weeks ago. So I'm super excited to have Mansal on here. I've been spending these last couple of weeks integrating and reading his book and just allowing it all to land and processing how deeply this relationship with his work and my work and death kind of overlap and are allies to one another. So thank you so much for being here. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about how you found Sacred Hunting and, became all of this?
Well, thank you for having me, and great to see you again in person after seeing you on that experience. The way I found Sacred Hunting was, I think, through, like many people, through my own pain and seeking an understanding of first what it meant to be connected to my sense of masculinity. But then also connected to the greater feminine of nature, especially in a place in my life where I was really yearning for connection to the feminine and unsure of how to foster that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was from a place of pain, and now it becomes one of my greatest gifts and something I'm happy to share with others.
Yeah, absolutely. The relationship to the feminine is quite a theme in your book, and you speak about that in relation to the land. And that really felt, as a feminine embodied being, feeling that respect felt super just beautiful for me, I suppose. I know you had quite a journey with that though, which you shared in your book, that involves prison and do you feel comfortable sharing into that? Yeah.
I'm open book about it.
Yeah. Would you just share it a little bit?
Sure. So when I was younger, my lack of guidance around what it meant to be a masculine being led me to just essentially create stories from what I saw in the media that to be connected to the feminine meant having relationships with women specifically. And that kind of myopic focus led me, as a adolescent with plenty of insecurities, it led me to feel like I needed love and affirmation from the feminine any way that I could.
Yeah.
And the way that I chose, and I wasn't aware of this at the time, I kind of set aside any moral understandings and decided that I was going to steal some documents from a museum that I was working in and sell them so that I could go be with a woman that was in Switzerland that I had fallen in love, I thought was love at the time. And so I went through that experience and ended up in Europe for a couple of years. And when I came back to the United States, I got arrested, and it was a pretty big wake-up call. There was a lot of media around it. There was just a lot. It brought up a lot. Shame about my actions, about what I did with my family. And I was 20 years old, and I didn't really have the tools or the awareness to understand what was going on. And I wouldn't really develop those until after I got out of prison 4 years later. But it was a wake-up call for me that my relationship to the feminine needed some reflecting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that vulnerability. And so what I'm hearing is finding Sacred Hunting then led to this sort of obviously you had this initiation of prison and all of that, and then you found Sacred Hunting, which allowed you to actually initiate with the feminine. Is that?
Yeah, it was, again, I didn't really have the words for this, but when I was searching for practices to embody masculinity, hunting was one of those.
Yeah.
And it just resonated with me at some like felt sense that I couldn't really explain. And definitely I would say one of my gifts is to just say yes to those kind of inner callings and the aliveness that presents itself. And so I said yes to hunting for the first time, and it was really, it was accidental, but I had some really profound experiences with plant medicine, specifically ayahuasca or grandmother, where I got to feel the magnitude of what it meant to be hunting. And that is really where a lot of the feminine started to come into my relationship with hunting. Was seeing it in a way and like feeling it, more importantly, in a way that I hadn't expected, and I don't think most people allow or are able to tap into, especially men.
Beautiful. So you had this initiation with the feminine, and you kind of speak of all of your retreats as these initiations as well. And to give the listeners a little bit more of a context, I first signed up for your experience like 8 months or something, like 7 months before it was actually taking place. And I was going through this initiation with my body. Like I was having a lot of like womb issues, and it felt like I was going through like a death of sorts. And when I came across your work, I realized there was like no other way I could be more intimate with death than by being in the presence of it. And I had never really had that experience. Except for when I was quite young, my dog died, and like that was it. But I've never seen any family members pass or like, harvested an animal. There's been like the spiders that I squashed, not anytime recently, but that felt really powerful for me. So I'd love to speak more into like initiation, especially because like men don't have much initiation. And how has that been for you?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the initiation and men specifically. Right. I was speaking to someone recently, and the term rite of passage came up. And when I think of a rite of passage, I think of a pretty innate human desire, but definitely a masculine need. And, there's cultures all over the world, indigenous cultures, that have separately but simultaneously arrived to this inherent need for men to go through often something that's challenging, to transition from boyhood to manhood. And I think part of that, for men in particular, is the absence of a biological rite of passage. Because women have the moment when they start menstruating. That's one rite of passage that's very clear physiologically. And then, of course, childbirth is literally a rite of passage.
It gives me chills.
And so while I think it's innate for everyone at some level, I think the fact that it's so biologically built in for women kind of maybe sometimes tempers it compared to men who really seek and long for this really clear understanding of when it is that they have transitioned and what responsibilities come to them as a result, what way of being is imperative for them as a result. And of course, one of the most common rites of passage for boys was hunting. And it was hunting out of necessity. A boy would not transition into manhood and be able to take a wife and have children if they could not provide for them. So hunting was really a proxy for, can you provide for a family? And so it has become really tightly ingrained with the masculine to have that kind of rite of passage.
So fascinating. I'm remembering something for your book as well that I'm just curious about. So because you went to prison, you can't shoot a rifle. Is that still true?
Still true.
Oh
Yep.
my God. So it's forever.
It's technically it's forever, and in many ways, it was kind of a cosmic nod to me because that forced me to do archery. So I have had to hunt with a bow, which is significantly harder and significantly more of a commitment, and also therefore can be more profound and more intimate with the animal, more intimate with the prayer of the practice. So it's a gift and a curse.
Wild. Thank you for. As I was reading the book, obviously, I don't think I didn't see you shoot a gun the entire weekend, and the participants do, because that's really what time allows. I think is a big part of that. But it was just fascinating to me to read that. So there's this initiation piece, and obviously I'm stepping into this as a feminine being, but it was a bit of initiation for my masculine as well, just like being around men, even like alone, let alone the physical experience and the spiritual experience that I had. And it also was this initiation in recognizing death. So part of like everything that was happening to me in the spring was like all related to like the womb work, and also recognizing like what sort of things will like heal me, and the way that we are currently like consuming food. And I'm a pretty conscious eater, but I wasn't like eating like, to me it was just like recognizing like what is my relationship to my food, and like what will really nourish my womb, and like meat and those things really help with that, and organs and all that stuff. And I used to be like mostly vegetarian. Like I would eat meat like once or twice a month, and that was kind of it. And as I transitioned into eating more meat, because I really felt that was what was nourishing my body, I started to recognize that like everything is consciousness, right? Including plants. And there's no way to get through any sort of eating without death. And I cannot birth the baby, really. Like if my womb isn't nourished, that birth can't happen. And seeing this relationship between like the birth, death, and sex in this way, like they can't exist without one another, and like finding peace with all that was super profound for me. So I'm just curious if you have anything on that, just so I can do.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason that I came into some of the work that I'm doing now, and the way that it impacted me from a meaning and fulfillment perspective was because of the relationship to meat. I grew up essentially vegetarian. My mother's from India. And so a big part of my relating to hunting was wanting to have some kind of closeness to the process. And I remember I read The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was top of mind for me when I went into a ceremony about a month after my first animal that I had killed. And I could just see the logic happening in my mind during the ayahuasca experience. It was, if animals store trauma in their body, or if humans store trauma in their body, then animals store trauma in their body. And if animals store trauma in their body, and I am eating their trauma, and then having that become a part of me, I'm literally just consuming and having their trauma become a part of myself. And in that moment, the idea of karma in Hindu culture actually clicked, and I could kind of understood like a piece of it as far as like bringing that energy into me. But regardless, that's when I made some commitments around kind of meat that I eat. And so, the way that I show up in the experiences and I facilitate an experience is one thing. What I do in my day-to-day life and how I lead my life is another. And I think they're connected. I can't go hunt and teach people to hunt and then just willy-nilly like eat whatever meat that I find. So for the last 5 years, I haven't eaten anything in my house meat-wise that I didn't kill myself.
Amazing.
And I went like the first year, I went really strict with it, and it was like I didn't even eat anything that was not
Yeah.
I killed or caught myself. And going through that practice is like so foundationally impactful. Even if it's for short, whatever the duration is, let's say a week or a month, whatever you can do.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a very profound part of the experience of stepping into that world.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And so with the experience, obviously, we're consciously choosing to end an animal's life, and maybe there's like a contract between you and the animal, and that's something to speak into, but it does come with this level of like responsibility and grief even. And I haven't shared with like anyone except for my close friends, my partner, and my family that on the retreat, in the experience, I did have the opportunity to harvest an animal, and I took it. And yeah, there was a lot of feeling to do with that, because I feel like a lot of the participants that come in really want to harvest an animal, right? And for me, it was like I didn't need it at all. In fact, as we were walking the land, I was praying and saying, I don't want this unless it's like a very clear part of my journey that I'm meant to do. And it was really at the very end of that night that I had it. And yeah, it's bringing it all back up, just like sharing it and speaking about it with you, because we didn't have a ton of time to go into it in depth. And it was also just like being in it. That was one thing that I have to say, I've done a lot of self-development work, and so much of it is so intellectual that afterwards it's just like, this is the clear thing that I learned or got from it. And from the experience at the Sacred Hunting Retreat, it was like I was wordless. There's just so in the body and such an experience that this is something that is just carried with me, and I don't really have so many words for it, but it's fun that we get to try in this time. But I would love to speak into that feeling of grief. For me, it was like immense grief and gratitude at the same time. It was just like overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So how do you process those emotions with yourself and also with participants?
Yeah, well, I mean, first to speak to the embodiment piece, or the lack of words. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love the practice so much, is because it is such an embodied reflection of what I need to learn about certain things about myself, about the world, about my inner world. And it's like no other in that way. It's not, everyone intellectually understands if they eat meat, something died.
Yeah.
But it's how do we feel that in every part of our being, and can take that, can we take that forward, like that certain type of knowing. Yeah. And so, and your question was beyond that, what was it again?
It was processing the grief and the gratitude and just like the feelings that come with taking the life of an animal, and so consciously doing it. Because one of my takeaways, which we talked about a little bit, was just seeing how pervasive death is, and how even if we're not conscious of it, in every moment we are actively participating in some kind of death, whether it's an internal death within us, whether it's our body killing off cells that aren't good for us, or it's like the clothes that we're wearing being like an animal or plant fiber, where like the fossil fuel, like whatever, like in every moment there's a death that we're actively participating in. But to actually partake in it and to process that is like a whole different experience. Yeah, I mean,
there's this could be a whole podcast on this topic in particular, but for one thing, I find the practice of holding the tension between seemingly opposing feelings to be a really beautiful practice. And it's kind of a fine skill to be able to hold both, as you said, the grief and the gratitude at the same time. And it's almost like it's just a unique sensory kind of experience.
Like a divine dichotomy.
Right. Yeah. And kind of like pain and pleasure.
Exactly. That was where I was going to go next.
Yeah. And it's very present throughout my experiences, whether I'm hunting personally or leading other people. And yeah, there's no answer necessarily. There's as much as possible a leaning into the emotions, especially because I tend to be more on the sensitive side for a man. But that being said, the key that hunting provides to open the door of emotions for me is an important practice for me to be in touch with all of my emotions. And so it really becomes a gateway. And the grief that I experience from one animal becomes a gateway for me to experience the grief, the collective grief, my own personal grief. I mean, I've had hunts where I've killed an animal and for whatever reason, the challenge, you know, I talk about Alice, the bison that I hunted, and it brought up, there was parts of me that were grieving my relationship, which was not what I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Even though I'm also grieving the death of this animal, and I'm grieving the experience that I just had with her.
Yeah.
So it really just unlocks for me a lot of these emotions. And I think that's one of its greatest gifts, is to acknowledge it, is to touch the place and feel like the full depth of that emotion in all the ways that it shows up in my life.
Yeah, I love that you brought up pain and pleasure, because that's definitely a foundational piece of Tantra. The deeper that you meet your grief and your pain, and the more dense experiences of this reality, the greater your ability to receive pleasure and abundance and love and all of those pieces. And my word this year was receive. Like, I choose a word every year. My word was receive. And again, it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to receive abundance and love and make all of the fun things. But what does it mean to really receive the depths of your emotional being? And I think that was, and then again, like coming back to the womb piece, the womb is like the receiving space of the feminine. And so to meet death, which is the thing that what's the word? Like, we put so much energy and like, I can't think of the word that I'm trying to come up with here, but it's just, we put a lot of meaning in that. And it's not to say that meaning is good or bad, but it's just like weight. We put a lot of weight in it. And so allowing myself to feel that and to meet it and to receive that was a really powerful way for me to end the year. And so your retreats are mostly men, and speaking of it as like a male initiation, but you do have a couple hunts a year that are co-ed. How do the containers differ? Like, how does that feel for you to have like women in the space, or to facilitate differently in that way?
Yeah, I'm usually a little bit more mindful of the intensity of the medicine, of not the plant medicine. I just mean the medicine of what I like bring to a container, because oftentimes I do bring a very like masculine, centered, kind of medicine.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain like sensitivity with which I can connect with men on an emotional level and really support and affirm them and things like that. But I also very much push them beyond their edges. And sometimes that looks like, you know, in the dead of summer, we have ceremony and it's really, really hot and we're outside in the elements. And I'm, you know, someone's going through a process and I'm not the type of, with a friend, I can definitely, I have a nurturing side.
Yes.
But the medicine that's like most calling to me is go through your process.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will hold space, and this is yours.
Yeah.
It's yours to bear. If you want responsibility in the masculine, bear it. I tend to be a little bit more mindful of that kind of intensity when I have females in the container. But I also don't shy away from it, because, you know, I think I express what it is that I try and create in these experiences well enough that they know and they're kind of opting in for
Yeah,
that. And we all have, both masculine and feminine
for sure.
within us, and so I allow the females to build that in a way that is different than the kind of build a business entrepreneur masculine that so many, women find themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely find myself there as well. So it was definitely initiation in that way for me, to hold presence in that way. And it was just a great experience overall. Even just being out in nature off my phone for 3 days. Like, I don't think in my entire adult life I've been without my phone for that long. And so that was great alone.
Yeah. I always find it funny how people initially, there's the body language when they give me the phone on the first day is like kind of reluctant.
Yeah.
And by the end, people just
don't even want it back. It was equal. I don't want it and I want it. And I did find that evening I was choosing to not partake in it so much.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah. And, I find that the connection to nature, the connection to our own emotions, the connection to that whole process is amplified by using plant medicines and psilocybin in particular. And that's one of the reasons why I bring it, because we live in a dominant culture that doesn't teach us to be connected to all of those things at all times.
Yeah.
And so it's just a support. But there's so much subtle learnings that happen from nature. Through just presence. Yeah. And especially presence without the distractions of technology. Yeah. And so the metaphor I always give is like a cup of water from a river and just watching all the dirt settle to the bottom and kind of clarify, create this clear water. Yeah. That's what it feels like people go through when they leave their phone and just kind of let everything settle.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk a little bit more about like animal medicine and specifically like feeling like a contract between the animal that you're with. And I had 2 experiences of this in the weekend. And the first one was actually leading up. And I had shared this with the group that the week before I went on this trip, I found this butterfly that was like dying on the road. And I took it home and was trying to bring it back to life. I gave it sugar water and all the things, and it just it wasn't getting better. And my partner is like, you need to smash it, basically. And so I get this rock and I go to do it, and I'm crying, and then it starts fluttering its wings again. And so anyways, I ended up learning that to actually like ethically euthanize a butterfly, you put it in a plastic bag and you put it in the freezer. So I did that, but it was like a very emotional experience for me. Also just recognizing that I'm in this transition, and to me, butterfly medicine is all about transition. And then there's also this death piece coming in, and it was just super emotional. And then the first day of our experience together, we're out shooting the guns, like lining up, and I kind of let everyone go before me because I didn't really want to do it. It's part of it, but I also knew I was going to have to. But in that time, this butterfly went and landed on my belongings, and I went and kind of picked it up, and it stayed on my finger, like while people were shooting their guns, which I'm kind of jerky with the guns. And then one of the participants came up and like, oh, I want to hold it now, and put his finger out, and the butterfly actually backed onto my hand to stay on me. And so to me, it was just this message, like what I took from it was, from the butterfly that I stewarded into death the week before, it was this message of you have our blessing as a steward of death. Like you have showed your reverence, I suppose. So I'm curious if you've had like experiences like that, or like what your thought is on like the contract of animals and like their communication to us.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful to hear your relationship with butterflies and how that impacted you. And also, there's an element of you placing meaning onto these experiences, which is in many ways I find to be a more a more pure or primordial way of relating to meaning.
Yeah.
Because so many people utilize, let's say they use dreams and they use very specific like Jungian kind of analysis of dreams or whatever, or even more common is religion. They use religion and they create meaning from those.
Yeah.
And there's a disconnection there between like the true essence of our connection to Earth, which I think is of paramount importance.
Yeah.
And so to have a relationship with animals where they become your guides, at some level, you know, the rational materialist part of myself struggles with placing meaning onto these kinds of synchronicities. But ultimately, I think that is such a it's such a subtle type of intimacy with nature that our ancestors would have had significantly more than we have today. I mean, they would have been literally so immersed in a part of nature that those kinds of symbols would have been and were like huge factors. I mean, people in North American indigenous cultures, their names would come from different visions and experiences that they had with nature, the medicine that they would bring. I mean, literally their mission, their purpose in the Dagara tribe in Africa, like they were told and they were taught their rite of passage was to go to the school of plants and animals in order to receive their mission in the world. And so, you know, and for them specifically, their hierarchy was the first wisest beings are plants, the second wisest beings are animals, and the third are humans.
Wow.
And so there's this looking to nature as guide and teacher that is so innate in us. And so it's really incumbent upon us to find and foster that type of inner listening, because that's what it is. It's listening to the synchronicities that are around us and then allowing that to guide, you know, our lives. So I find it beautiful, and everyone's going to have a kind of a unique relationship with their own medicine and the way they form meaning. And that's also beautiful because there's a sense of sovereignty there where people can create the meaning that they desire, guided by nature.
Yeah, there is an essence of it that is poetic, and it is easy to get into the feeling of like, is this make-believe or am I just being a child? And I think that it's such a balance, and also it's beautiful, and also it's really easy to take the way that we've evolved to look at the world on and judge ourselves for that as well. The other thing that happened to me over the weekend was when it came time for me to like line up a shot. There were 3 black buck there, and I lined it up with one of the animals and went to shoot. My gun just didn't fire. And in that moment, there could have been a story of, oh, I'm not meant to do this at all, actually. And that's why this didn't work. And for some reason that didn't come up. It didn't come up until after, actually. But what ended up happening is we reloaded it, made sure it was good. And the original animal that I had lined up my shot with had moved, and it wasn't a good aim anymore. So I had to readjust, and there was a different one that I kind of stepped forward. And so what I ended up making of it, with being the meaning-making machine I am, was that animal like had chosen itself over the other one because of whatever contract there was. And the name that came to me, and you name most of your animals, or all of them, I'm not sure. The name that came to me was Jude. And when we went to meet the animal and said our prayers and we're walking down, singing the song Hey Jude by the Beatles, which the lyrics are, let her into your heart, let her under your skin. And it's like, was so literal in that moment to me that, it just felt really powerful and really like meditative and deep. And like, I feel like coming home and cooking the heart for my partner and like the leg for my friends was like so intimate and so special. And it's something that now it's like something that I can't even put into words, but it's just incredible. So thank you for that experience. It's really beautiful. And even just the experience of like being out with the animals in the mornings and in the evenings and watching them and being with the land was the best part of the weekend for me personally.
Yeah, it's people don't. It's hard for people to often understand that my love for those animals is so high.
Yeah.
Because of the relationship that I have with them hunting. So, because we enter into this, there's definitely a pact that I find with the animals that I feel very drawn towards. And some of them are ancestral. I mean, some tribes believe that an animal offered itself to be killed if the humans agreed to protect the whole species. Yeah. So it's a sacrifice of one for the benefit of all. And in that way, I do feel that there's a pact. And, whether something is, I have this belief and kind of live my life according to this phrase, like, is it true or is it useful? Yeah. And when we come to this place of like creating meaning and looking at synchronicities, it just seems so useful to be able to have the experiences that you do and to have it like land and resonate with you in a certain special way because of the name, because of the song that you're singing and then the sharing that you have. Like that story is poetry in and of itself. And that is a form of respect for Jude that very few animals get. Yeah. And so that's your gift back is to the collective loving on, this animal and the land. Yeah, to me, the hunter has this sort of like, the hunter is in a way a dark archetype and not a shadow archetype. It's just like, it carries a darkness that can be beautiful and expansive, and it's related to like the earth the same way that, there's a dark feminine that's sensual and sexual, and like that has a beauty to it that creates, pleasure and also like procreation in some ways. And I did this around the time that I signed up for your retreat. I was also doing this other one that was more focused on shamanism and sexuality and death as well. And in it, we had this experience where we got to be a predator or prey, and we kind of hunted each other. And within it, like it rewrote as the predator, you were like loving this animal. Like, I love you so much, I could eat you up. And you're like after the animal is down, you're like protecting it. You're protecting it from other like creatures coming in. You have this sense of like love and devotion to it, and reframing that and understanding that relationship more clearly. I just think it's a more holistic view of the world. Like I feel like we really put like white light energy on a pedestal, and there's a lot of shadow that can happen there when you're not integrating the fullness of the human experience and the animal experience as well. Even the predator within us that doesn't get expressed when we're not honoring that. And it's also a really important piece that relates to how we interact with other people too. Yeah. And sexuality for sure. Yeah. I notice in my own life, like there's a way that is often to people, especially conscientious people, there's a way that hunting can be seen as shadowy. Yeah. And there's a lack of, integrating feelings and emotions and reverence and love. And the same can be, said about the sexual world. And I 100% bring a very like predator archetype to my relationships with women, and it has to be as mindful as my relationship to the predator in a hunting context if it's going to be like for the good of all.
Yeah, in some ways I actually trust men that are connected to that darkness and conscious of it so much more than like the white knight. Like I don't actually trust like the white knight archetype at all. And that's something that I get to work through and like has a whole other story related to it. But to me, men that are in integrity with that and own it are just feel much safer to me.
Yeah.
Because there's not the distortion. It's like, this is dark, but it's like, it's power. It's like Batman, you know?
Yeah. When I initially went into doing men's work and shadow work as a part of that, one of the things that I learned really quickly was I never get rid of my shadow. I just keep it in front of me. And so as I step into deeper parts, and this is definitely a season for me of stepping into deeper parts of the more primal archetypes that exist within me, there are times where whoa, that feels uncomfortable to recognize that that's there and that's alive and well. But then to integrate it as, not bad or wrong, but has a place and might not necessarily have the microphone in all contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Well, I feel really good about this conversation. I feel like this is a good time to start wrapping up, if that's okay with you. If there's anything else you want to add, that's obviously fine. Otherwise, I'll begin to transition into the last couple of questions. Beautiful. Great. So I ask this question to all my guests. What awakens your arrows? What turns you on? What makes you feel erotically alive?
Yeah, in this season of life, it's a great segue. It is those archetypes.
Yeah.
Like it is and of course all this is done consensually, but like being with a woman and like whispering to her that she could not leave even if she tried.
Yeah.
Or like the archetype of impregnating her.
Yeah.
It's so primal because it's like passing DNA is such a primal desire and need. And so those kinds of archetypes, when it's like consensual and safe and everybody feels good in that, those are so fun for me to explore, to like really bring the hunter into the bedroom.
I love it. Owning it. Amazing. I think anyone's answered it that way as well. So I fucking love that. Where can people find you or support you or take part in your hunts, things like that? Yeah,
I have on my website, sacredhunting.com. They can find, all the details and things that people have shared about the experience. And then for people who are not ready to necessarily go from a podcast to an in-person experience, I have a book available, which you read. So sacredhunting.com/book. And they can just pick that up and see if it feels like resonant fit for them. And you have like an email, like like newsletter, which is great. I don't read all of them, but when one draws me, it's really good musings, short ways to get a little taste of this medicine on the day-to-day. Yeah, so, beautiful. Yeah. sacredhunting.com/TST. Love it. I want to get on the email list. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the listener for tuning in. Thank you for opening yourself up to primal energy and sacred sexuality and death and all the dark, yummy things. And we'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra 2. Ta-ta.